Great. Come back up, Kate. You don't get to escape yet. So I think John finished us off well there with the comment spark debate, which is what we're going to try and do for the next 20 minutes or so before we all escape to drinks. It was pretty exciting. I discovered throughout your presentations that effectively my employer has been shortchanging me. I am not working with drones. I have no videos of amazing fried food that will stay with me for all human time, and nor do I have content featuring attractive young men in swimming costumes. So I'm feeling pretty desolate about my whole employment right now. So what I'm hoping to learn is some real kind of business insights. And before we get these guys to ask you questions, perhaps I could start off by saying, one of the things we all refer to there is the kind of plethora of names that we give this stuff: branded content, content marketing, native. Do you find that clients understand what you're talking about?
You want to
go? I'll start. I suppose the way that I would look at this is probably a slightly different way of looking at it. Hopefully it's okay. Is that whilst there's lots of names branded, I think branded content probably does resonate, in the kind of the best way. But actually, it's really about how you work with brands for them to understand how our audience wants to kind of receive and see content. And that in itself, if you get that right, you can create some absolutely amazing pieces. And as any brand, and absolutely rightly, wants to have their brand running all the way through their content. And I think that's as we do more and more of this across the board, it's about finding that kind of real sweet spot between what makes great content and how you can still have a brand kind of associated with that. So to the question, it's like, I think it's rather than what do you call it, it's actually how do you kind of almost, all constantly developing and working with clients to understand the audience and understand what makes great content.
So how then, John, do you do it? Do clients get sign-off of branded content pieces? How much involvement do they have in the creative process?
We have a creative team, obviously, I say obviously, but a creative team that we're kind of developing. And there's two sides. We just, whenever we work on a brief, it's we part of that whole process is kind of understanding what we do and what works well as content. So we always thread that in to kind of when we're delivering a response, if you like. So that understanding early in that process is absolutely critical. And then, when we're developing that content, it's allowing the brand, giving the brand access really to us and to the resource we have. But like I say, there's no perfect formula for this because it depends on the campaign, it depends on what they're trying to achieve. And again, we've had examples where the brand is, so Domino's we worked with over the Euros, and that was kind of a Gogglebox style thing, and that was really cool. But that had, the pizza was delivered halfway through the kind of game they were watching, but it was fine because it worked quite authentically. So it's getting that right. So it's not that we wouldn't have branding, and threading that through content. It's just about making sure that brand understands us, we understand brand early on in the process.
I think brands know about branded content. I think the challenge is when it gets a bit more minute. I think that we've come across challenges when they don't quite understand what an influencer is, or how to work with an influencer, what that really means, or how they work, or how they get access to them, or is it worth doing, and all that sort of stuff. And I think it's when you sort of get to a granular level, which is what you can do if you want to be, like the really good brands are essentially being like, oh, we're only going to work on these 2 platforms, and we want to only work with these 3 individuals. It's really granular stuff. So I think that's probably more the challenge. And I think the biggest challenge that I have is to take away, you can do anything nowadays, I think. And that's what I'm trying to educate the brands that we work on, is there's not really any rules. Like what you think might be like a thing that you can and can't. Well, I don't really think that really exists anymore. That you can either follow the trends that are happening in the media, and you can follow those if you want to, but if you can also completely rebel against that and do everything opposite. It really comes down to great ideas and great stories. And if you can figure out the best way of executing that and delivering that, whether that's something that's very old school, I don't think that's really an issue. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is when you're presented with a myriad of options, the challenge actually is trying to decipher that. And I think the success that publishers can have is because it's a very sellable product. And I think that's why you guys can do so well, because it's a very easy thing to buy. And especially for the agency model as well. Agencies are a bit like, well, that's an easy choice because there's the audience and there's that sort of stuff. And I think that what I'm trying to do, and essentially what Kate and I are both kind of trying to do, is essentially educate and give people, there's other options as well. There's not just this traditional route of working. There are actually ways that we all can work together and that actually can all kind of benefit and kind of work together. So, yeah.
And so one of the things you said earlier, Tom, was that you called it H2H, human to human. You said there's no B2B and B2C.
Yeah.
And even if people are buying with their, human side in a B2B context, what are the differences in creating kind of great branded content in those two different environments? Are there any?
I mean, I don't believe so. I mean, it's just because if I'm buying some computer software, the story can be real and have an emotional currency and edge to it. Why is that any different than telling a story about an energy drink?
Yeah.
I don't believe so myself,
Yeah, I agree. We make a lot of B2B video, and it's a similar sort of thing. It's trying to make it emotive and speaking to your audience in what channel you're trying to speak to them in. It's the same formula.
I think business content can be really amazing and inspiring. We all work, we all do stuff, and we're all very passionate about what we do. And if we put the emotional element into what we do and why we're excited about a traditional, whether it's even if it is a software company, there's something exciting in there. And I think it's about trying to get those emotions out of sometimes products that seem very stiff. I don't think they need to be.
And so one quick question before we open it up to the audience, they can ask you what they really want to know. Do you find that creatively you're leading your clients, or are they leading you? What's been your experience so far?
For me, I think it's a bit of both. They come to me with a concept and an idea. I don't sell them anything. So in the process of buying and all that sort of stuff, I'm completely impartial with everyone. I don't have any deals with my network where they will get work from me and all that sort of, completely impartial. I'm impartial to agencies, impartial to the brands that we work with. So I simply offer a guide, all these different routes that you can make and do amazing things. And whether that's like, oh, you should work with publishers and that's the best thing you should do. Or maybe you can't, that's maybe not, you don't have enough money to do that. I don't really, yeah. So, yeah.
I guess it's back to what you were saying about finding the right person for the job, I think, as well. Like, actually, I've worked with both of your companies before, So we have quite similar services, but quite complementary as well. And for us, it's all about finding the best person for the job, I think. And whether that's the right director or the right idea, it just depends on the brief.
Great. Well, let's find out what the audience really want to know. I know we've got a couple of mics going around. Would you put up your hands and imagine that I'm really blind, so I'm going to need lots of help to see you. Please also, if you could introduce yourself when you speak, just so we know the context of your question. Thank you.
Hi, is this on?
Yep.
Yeah, great. I'm Mike Jarvis, I'm a consultant. We had a lot of discussion today about premium sites. As a consumer, a premium site to me offers me editorial value, very importantly, editorial integrity. As an advertiser, there was discussion today about the very valuable rub-off an advertiser can get from the synergy with a premium site. I'm concerned over how the traditional values of those premium sites can be undermined by the increasing volume of sponsored content within those sites. Even old fella like me, I'm a traditional Telegraph reader. I now suspect almost all the editorial outside of the main news in the Telegraph is being paid for, and it causes me a concern going forward.
Yeah.
To all these people.
Yeah.
I fully agree with that, and I think I don't know. In one of my slides, this native hype and creating branded content and hey, brands are investigating it more, and when it comes to that co-creation where a publisher is essentially being paid to create content, there's high risk there. Because if the creative is not good enough, then the negative benefits are actually seismic to the brand and to the publisher as well. So it becomes at great risk. And so poor content can be divisive, and it's quite common if you look, there's lots of statistics out there from publishers where they are losing because it's whether it's the tagging of how clear whether that is sponsored content. Being a salesperson at The Guardian for many years, there was a big argument. I worked for The Guardian, so the editorial team was like, we have to be very, very clear about where that money came from. But then the sole focus is to make something that actually is of value. And I think at my time working for a publisher, making content for brands, it was integral that I made stuff that I thought that could give back to the community of The Guardian. But there's high risk involved.
I would actually say that we're probably heading for a better time. I think that things like ad blockers being a huge thing right now, a huge threat to our industry, but also a great turning point, I think, for the industry as well. So I would argue that publishers have, for the last, 8 years, had banners on their website, for example, that had really low engagement, really low click-through, really low ROI. And now what we're sort of seeing is this explosion of video content, which can be disruptive, but also can be positive. And I think that what I'm seeing at the Smalls is that my clients are learning more and more about how to make really great content that people actually want to watch. So for The Sun, we made some awesome parenting videos that happened to be sponsored by Tesco Back to School uniform. But actually they were giving like really great hacks for parents that had super high engagement because they weren't throwing a message in your face, which is what we have been doing for the past however long. So actually I think that we are in a turning point, and I think it's for the better.
I agree. And I was going to add that I think one of the things, I employed our head of content marketing, and she has a lot of conversations with brands, which is where we say the fact that if you want to do advertising, do advertising. We've got a really lovely advertising offer. If you want to create content, please understand that we want you to create the best possible content. And actually, what we want you to create is the perfect thing, which is content that somebody paid you to create that your audience wanted anyway. And that's the job we're here to help you do. We're not here to make another ad for you. And we're very, very explicit. And if people don't want to work like that, then we can't work with them on branded content.
I think that one expression is probably the single biggest piece of feedback when you're working on creative pieces. It's like you're trying to create an ad, and that's not what I just completely agree with that. Actually, it's been really fascinating at the Lab Bible. I think there's more editorial integrity within the Lab Bible simply because there's such a focus on every piece of content that goes out, because again, this whole piece around shares and likes, so it has to be authentic to what the brand does. So yeah, and again, yeah, all the piece around making sure it's very clear that it is branded content, but actually it's sitting very comfortably within the kind of content we put out. Also, yeah, youth community audience, they will call you out if it's a bad piece of content and they think they're just being kind of fooled or trying to be sold to. So that's, it's actually, and I think there's a lot better content.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing now. We're seeing some fantastic video content.
I think I would totally agree with that. And I also think the biggest value proposition a publisher has is people come to you to tell their stories, but in your tone of voice. Like that is why they're coming to buy inventory from the Telegraph or the Sun or the Times. It's because they want a piece of your brand to rub off on you, but they also want to come and have you tell their stories for them, which is worth so much.
John, is there brands that you wouldn't work with?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's a youth audience, so it's attractive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the way that we look at that is not so much about brand, it's about what the brand is trying to achieve. And so it's very important to know that brand fits, and that we know that they'll get the right response from our audience. He said slightly politician's answer, but it is true, because we actually, the spread of brands now and the opportunity that's out there is really exciting. But it is that kind of authenticity to the audience as well. So I wouldn't necessarily say there wouldn't be brands we wouldn't work with, but it's all about fitting it to the right objectives.
Is it primarily agencies?
that
coming to that.
But it's a blend of both. Yeah. So we work very closely with agencies across the board, but also we're working with brands directly as well. So there's a mix of the two.
Okay, great. So any other questions from the audience? Don't be shy, and remember, I'm very blind.
Silence.
Yeah.
No, I don't believe there isn't a question out there. I never believe this at events. Come on. It's just my bad eyesight. Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask you guys another question, which was about, so let's talk about real time. You mentioned the importance of creating real time content.
Yeah.
Who's doing this really well? And this is an area that seems kind of still in its infancy.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, we are creating 80 lives a month for News UK. And our editorial product is to enable them to be part of the conversation online, which they're really excellent at as a publisher. I think it's becoming more and more crucial. I think that it's only going to become more and more crucial. So with the growth of programmatic, for example, will come an ever-growing need to create really quick content that's 100% for that person at that time, in that language, in that color, all those kind of things. So I think that my sort of product that I showed you on the screen, the sort of editorial, always-on product, is a step before this sort of programmatic product that is heading for us, that will enable publishers, brands and agencies to create content that is much more tailored and much more based on your information, which is frightening but also hopefully positive. Sorry, I hope that answers your question.
I was just going to say really quickly, rather than talking about the whole live thing again, which is obviously very important to us, actually it's just, you don't know what the next meme or the next really topical piece of content's going to be. It could happen tomorrow, it could happen, so we again, our whole structure of our business has to be focused on thinking about what that is and being absolutely switched on to that, which is it's fascinating seeing it kind of not just the structure, but just the way that we have to react to content and knowing what content will work, because there isn't a set structure to that. You just don't know. You don't know what the next thing will be. So we have to be constantly thinking about that as a business. So it's both scary, but also it's a massive opportunity.
I think brands will be opposed to doing live on the scale because it's too nerve-wracking for them, because there'll be only a certain amount of gaming brands will be like, yeah, you just see whatever they say. I think that actually...
Except brands do live television, so what's the difference? We thought about this as well, and we've just started to franchise out lives, and the market is interested in them, and it is a risk because it's in its infancy, but I would argue, what is the difference from live television?
Yeah, you've got to have a proof of concept. I could, that point of not knowing what you don't know what that content's, what's going to happen within the content, what the end result could be. So there does have to be an element of trust in knowing, kind of what we're doing, because all right, so our Facebook Live content can vary from last week we had a DVD, the old DVD video thing, and it was bouncing around a screen, and we just put up as a live, and then it's gone. So that piece of content can do quite well because it's a distraction. The ice lollies melting can be a distraction, but then it can be much more involved, or so it's knowing kind of almost what works, and it kind of defies a little bit in kind of...
Yeah, and to your point, it is also becoming a competitive sort of, I guess, competition to broadcast as well.
It is,
which is, I guess, why they built it.
Yeah.
So one last question, because we're just about out of time. I'm quite nerdy. I'm really obsessed by the data that all my content produces, and by measuring everything and the KPIs, measuring whether I'm looking at engagement or whether I'm looking at volume. Is scale important? Is region important? All these things. So what would you say, kind of from your understanding, what are the kind of things you're being asked to measure that maybe you weren't being asked to measure in content a couple of years ago? What are the things that clients want?
I like on the previous presentation around attention.
Yep.
I'm super pro that time is one of our biggest commodities that we have, and that actually most people would pay premium for things nowadays. It's not just pound a drink here and there. And if you look at, because Red Bull is just one of one of the brands that we work with so closely, you know, their research for the younger audiences that they're drinking less alcohol and all that sort of stuff, and they're happy to, you know, pay, you know, £10 for a cocktail and to Instagram, all that sort of stuff. So the whole concept of what I grew up in at university, which was like pound drinks, and as long as I can get 10 drinks for a tenner, I'm like happy. Whereas like now these younger generation just want to have like one drink for like a tenner. What? Mental. And so
It's all gone very premium.
I think that time and attention is actually the biggest thing that I think moving forwards, because there's so much data. And I think that what we've seen, especially with like, just from my own personal experience with the bias when data can give you, you could argue one point or another with the data. You could say, oh, that received great engagement, so that means X. But then you could argue the same way for the other side as well. It's a bit like arguing if you like Trump or not. You could probably find data to say he's amazing versus, you know.
I don't actually think, Tom, we can agree on that.
No, I mean, that's maybe the wrong example for
I
him.
think now you're truly pushing the boundaries
First time it came
of
up.
reality.
And justifying the crazy people.
Brilliant.
I can answer that question too. I think that as we begin to monetize things like Facebook, who give you amazing access to data, I feel like 2 years ago brands were not so interested in where that audience was coming from in terms of their international reach. So for example, you know, if I'm monetizing my Facebook page and some of my audience is in India and some of it's in Africa and then a little bit of it is in the UK, but they're still selling premium rates to the brand to publish those videos on Facebook for targeting a UK audience, I feel like brands, from my own experience being out there selling, that brands are getting more savvy with that. And it's something that media agencies have done really well, understanding the audience and the demographic. I used to be a planner, so it's sort of like taking that amazing knowledge that the planners have in the media agencies and then giving it to the publishers to make sure that the science is still there and that we are still making videos that are for that audience. Because I think that is sort of either sort of still evolving.
Yeah.
All right.
And I was just going to say, for us, it's the word I'll pull out is sentiment. So, you know, the more that we can do to get genuine sentiment when a piece of content goes out. So on top of all the lovely kind of data points that we can access, you know, it's about finding out what our audience really thinks. So we run a bunch of algorithms to find out that sentiment, and that's constantly developing. So that's going to be really important.
Brilliant. Well, guys, we're out of time. So you heard it here. Be authentic, experiment, be entertaining, and remember to gather the data at the end of it. Richard, we're going to hand over to you. Thank you very much, panel.
Yes.